In a recent video that we published, I happened to mention how the frame that I like to use, let's say walking through the difficulties and challenges of life, is rather than seeing that I'm a human being who has spiritual experiences, I like to think of myself as a spiritual being who has human experiences. That, of course, leads me to the conclusion that there's somewhat of a choice to be here, if that's the case. One of our commenters in that video had asked me, do you really believe there's a choice? And yes, I believe there's a choice. But when you start to ask for proof, of course, this is when it becomes difficult. In Tolstoy's novel, Anna Karenina, beautiful book, there's a character, really the main character of the book. His name's Levin. And Levin is struggling with this idea of divinity. You know, the period that it's set, of course, the idea of logic to prove what is true and what isn't is coming into its adulthood. The age of reason has started to mature, and these discussions of replacing the idea of God with science are becoming more and more relevant. So this is sort of the context of what's happening in this book, and of course he's struggling with this idea. Now, mind you, this is a paraphrase, but at one point he makes a statement that there's just some types of knowledge that exist outside of reason. This is actually what Nietzsche meant when he said that God is dead. It wasn't that he was an atheist. It's more along the lines of when you take reason, when you take logic to its final conclusion, there is no room for God. Now, throughout time, throughout cultures, throughout the history of mankind, God has meant something different for each person. God is an intimate relationship that you have with a knowledge that's outside of reason. It's easy for us to discount it because people say, hey, there is no proof of God. And in the same hand, you can also say, there's no proof that there isn't a God. To be able to access this knowledge that exists outside of reason, of course, takes a leap of faith. Think about the idea of a miracle. You know, if we took a lot of the science that we have today, particularly around the atomic level, when we start to get into quantum physics and how things behave at the quantum level, what we've been able to do with that knowledge is a miracle. But since it's really proven and can be replicated, it's not really a miracle, it's science. The very nature of a miracle is the idea that it can't be replicated. And as well, every miracle that you may witness, I may witness, whoever may witness, it's an individual experience. It's a miracle to the individual. Now, I'm sure if we could somehow transport someone from 300 years ago into our society, they would be struck with wonder. Everything would truly be awesome. They would be full of awe at what we're capable of doing. As he was introduced to the science and the methods and the things that we take for granted, I believe that he would also see that it was a miracle that mankind was able to progress through this. But at the end of the day, what is this knowledge that's outside of reason? What is this substance that goes beyond what we can understand? You know, we live in two worlds. There's an outside world we live in, right? And a lot of the discipline of physics has come to understand the rules or the laws that govern this world. We understand electricity. Electricity existed throughout all of existence. But when we came to understand how to harness it, when we started to understand the laws that it operates by, we were able to take that electricity and turn on lights, turn motors, run it through circuitry. We were able to use it to our advantage because we started to understand the laws that surround the idea of electricity. Gravity is the same thing. Scientists still struggle with the idea of what is gravity. But regardless of what it is, we know that there's laws that surround gravity. And we're able to use those laws and shoot rockets into space, accelerate cars at what would have been considered 200 years ago ungodly speeds. We're able to fly planes. There's not a time that I don't go over a bridge, particularly a large bridge, good example would be the Sunshine Skyway down in Florida. It's a huge suspension bridge. And that bridge was built with law. This is how we've come to understand this outside world. But there's an inner world we live in as well. That's individual to each one of us. I believe it runs by law as well. Why wouldn't it? Everything that we see runs by law. For me personally, I'm not sure that I can really imagine God being human-like. To me, God is a sense of law. There's natural law. There's law that when you look at the golden mean, it shows up in nature all over the place, the golden ratio, whatever you want to call it, but it shows up all over the place in nature. There's some law that's dictating that. And there's a law to this inner world we live in as well. Let me give you an example as far as how we can't measure it in the same way that we measure the outside world. I can measure the distance between me and the camera. I can have a count for how much money is in my pocket. I can get on a scale and see how much I weigh. What I can't really evaluate, or I don't have a yardstick to measure by, is how much hope do you have? What's your level of frustration? How are you inspired? How much do you love? What do you worry? What's the extent of your worry? All of this is individual. And so there's these two different worlds we live in. There's this outside world that has becoming more and more defined by the laws it operates by. But there's still some mysteries, particularly when you start to get down to the quantum level of existence. And then there's this inner world that we live in. And it's through self-discovery that we're able to maybe feel our way into the dark of maybe not the law, but what guides a good life. The self-awareness and the honesty that we have with ourselves. We're able to determine for ourselves what is this natural law that we try to align ourselves with. Many people, their inner world is constantly reacting to their outer world. What I'm looking for is how to make my outer world react to my inner world. Remember, the whole concept behind change your mind. I like to use the analogy of film projector and your consciousness, your spirit, your soul, your essence of being human, whatever you call it. It's the light bulb in the projector. The film strip is your mind, and the world is the screen. If you want to see a difference in the world, you have to change your mind. You have to make the change here. You have to make the difference here. Gandhi said, become the change you want to see. So when I'm asked, do we really have a choice? I'm not sure that Matt particularly has a choice, this Matt that I am. But I do believe at the essence of who I am, the essence of what my true self is, that at its very nature, there's choice. Because without choice, then all there is destiny. You know, we're all living in the matrix. It's your job to find your way out. I hope what we share helps.